The civil laws. After the giving of the Ten Commandments, we have the civil law, seen in Leviticus chapters 21-23. This has to do with the new nation of Israel, and how it was to be administered, and how crimes were to be punished. We call this the civil law, but the book of Exodus actually calls this, and the section on the Ten Commandments, the book of the covenant. These chapters then conclude with the confirmation of the covenant. If we begin to think seriously about it, we have some difficult areas to address. Much of what we read has to do with the sacrifices. We really can't imagine ourselves offering sacrifices today. And much of it has to do with penalties for crimes. And we cannot imagine capital punishment for things like sorcery, blasphemy, and homosexuality. But on the other hand, this is the law of God given on Sinai by God Himself. Who are we to say, well, we'll obey some of the laws, and we're just not going to obey other laws? As for the civil law was given to Israel, and Israel was a unique kind of state, which was a theocracy, meaning that it was ruled by God. There's never been another theocracy like this one, which was directly ruled by God. Today, for nations to function, they need to establish their own laws. These laws were specifically given for the culture and place of the Israelites. Moreover, this law dictated Israel's daily living. This can be referred in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 10 to 11. These are the legal structures and laws for Israel that dealt with the consequences of breaking the law, business practices, and the treatment of servants and slaves. However, modern society and culture are so radically different today that it seems some of these guidelines cannot be followed specifically that are fulfilled. The civil laws of nation Israel can be understood by the Abrahamic covenant, Mosaic covenant, and Davidic covenant. The Abrahamic covenant. There are three critical aspects of the Abrahamic covenant that must be recognized. First, the Abrahamic covenant is a promise that was made specifically to the descendants of Abraham through Isaac and then Jacob, who was later renamed Israel. The ultimate heir of the promises was actually Yeshua the Messiah. Second, the primary emphasis of the promise concerned a very specific and literal piece of land on this earth. Third, the promise made through the Abrahamic covenant is ongoing, irrevocable, and everlasting. As the covenant-making ceremony ended, the Lord defined the region that He was giving to Abraham and his descendants. The boundaries of the land that was promised were incredibly precise, and it encompassed an area far greater than the relatively small segment of land that is today called the State of Israel. Here is the specific land that the Lord promised. From the river of Egypt as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenite and the Kenizzite and the Cadmonite and the Hittite and the Perizzite and the Rephaim and the Amorite and the Canaanite and the Girgashite and the Jebusite. This can be referred in Genesis chapter 15, verses 18 to 21. Based on these descriptions and other passages where the boundaries are reiterated, it is easy to define the Promised Land according to modern national and natural markers. Abraham had 8 sons altogether, but according to the Scriptures, the promises were only made to the descendants of his one son Isaac, which can be referred in Genesis chapter 17, verses 15 to 21, chapter 21, verses 9 to 13. The land promises of the Abrahamic covenant were made solely to the direct descendants of Jacob, the corporate family or nation of Israel. After the sons of Israel had long been slaves in Egypt, it was out of faithfulness to His covenant that the Lord responded to their misery. In the midst of their suffering, the Lord identified Himself to Moses as the one who had appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and established His covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they sojourned, which can be referred in Exodus chapter 6, verses 3 to 4. And then, in very clear and direct fashion, the Lord promised to give that very land to the sons of Israel as an everlasting possession, which can be referred in Exodus chapter 6, verses 5 to 8. Mosaic covenant. 430 years after the Abrahamic covenant was made, the Lord made another covenant with Israel, this time through Moses. The Mosaic covenant was profoundly different from the Abrahamic covenant. While the Abrahamic covenant was an unconditional, one-sided promise made by God, the Mosaic covenant was very much a two-sided legal agreement between the Lord and all of Israel. While the Abrahamic covenant is defined by the Lord repeatedly declaring, "I will," the Mosaic covenant is repeatedly defined by, "If you, then I will." Within the Mosaic covenant were the regulations and requirements to not only possess the land, but to remain in it. Now, O Israel, listen to the statutes and the judgments which I am teaching you to perform, so that you may live and go in and take possession of the land which the Lord, the God of your fathers, is giving you. You shall not add to the word which I am commanding you, nor take away from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God which I command you. This can be referred in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 1 to 2. If, on the other hand, the Israelites violated the various laws detailed in the Mosaic covenant, then the Lord would temporarily remove them from the land. For example, in Deuteronomy chapter 4, Moses warned the sons of Israel that if they acted corruptly in the land and fell into idolatry, then you will surely perish quickly from the land where you are going over the Jordan to possess it. You shall not live long on it, but will be utterly destroyed. The Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and you will be left few in number among the nations where the Lord drives you. Specifically, this can be referred in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 26 to 27. But after such a season of exile, Moses declared, in time, God would remember his promise made to them through the Abrahamic covenant and would bring them back to their land. When you are in distress and all these things have come upon you, in the latter days you will return to the Lord your God and listen to his voice. For the Lord your God is a compassionate God. He will not fail you, nor destroy you, nor forget the covenant with your fathers, which he swore to them. This can be referred in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 30 to 31. This point is absolutely critical. While the Jews' permanent residency in the land was contingent upon their obedience to the laws given in the Mosaic covenant, the Lord never reneged on the initial gift of his land to his corporate people Israel as made through the Abrahamic covenant. But what if they were disobedient and the Lord expelled them from the land? Did that mean that the land was no longer theirs? Not at all. Even if they became disobedient and the Lord expelled them from the land, their unbelief does not nullify the faithfulness of God. May it never be. The Davidic covenant. The Davidic covenant was delivered through Nathan the prophet to King David. Like the Mosaic covenant, the Davidic covenant also begins with a reiteration of the land promises made through the Abrahamic covenant. I will also appoint a place for my people Israel and will plant them, that they may live in their own place and not be disturbed again, nor will the wicked afflict them any more as formerly, even from the day that I commanded judges to be over my people Israel, and I will give you rest from all your enemies. This can be referred in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 10 to 11. But how will the Lord give Israel rest from her enemies in the land that he has promised? This will only come through Yeshua, the Messiah. For immediately following the words above, the Lord promised that a descendant of David would inherit the royal dynasty that would endure forever. In summary, the Abrahamic and Davidic covenants are unconditional, unilateral promises made by God to man, while the Mosaic covenant is a conditional and bilateral agreement between God and man. The initial land promise made through the Abrahamic covenant has become the foundational promise upon which every other covenant since that time has been built. The Mosaic covenant provides Israel with the conditions and regulations necessary to maintain unbroken occupancy of the land. The Davidic covenant, built upon the Abrahamic covenant, promised a king who will rule over Israel at the time when she inherits the land. The civil commands God gave to the nation of Israel. The believers living in the New Testament world were not in charge of a nation, and so they could not enforce many civil laws given to properly run the nation of Israel. Messiah said his followers were not to be a part of this world and its governments. Just before his crucifixion, he prayed, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. This can be referred in John 17:14. Messiah's kingdom is of a time yet future, not of this present world. Yeshua told Pilate, my kingdom is not of this world, which can be referred in John chapter 18, verse 36. The Apostle Paul made that point clear when he wrote that Messiah came to deliver us from this present evil age, that is Satan's age, which can be referred in Galatians chapter 1, verse 4. When tempting Messiah, the devil took him up on an exceedingly high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these things I will give you if you will fall down and worship me. This can be referred in Matthew chapter 4, verses 8 to 9. Yeshua didn't challenge Satan's authority to have all the kingdoms of the world under his power. Instead, Messiah simply said, "Away with you, Satan! For it is written, 'You shall worship the Lord your God, and him only you shall serve.'" This can be referred in Matthew chapter 4, verse 10. Since this is Satan's world, Messiah tells us that we should not be a part of it, although we still have to live in it. On the night he was taken to be crucified, Yeshua fervently prayed, "I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one." This can be referred in John chapter 17, verse 15. Subject to the governing authorities. Since believers in Messiah are not of this present evil age, God has assigned the responsibility of enforcing civil regulations to worldly rulers, who are also responsible to him. Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same, for he is God's minister to you for good. This can be referred in Romans chapter 13, verse 1 to 4. Paul himself was mistreated many times by the governments of his day, so he obviously was not implying that they always acted in a godly manner. This is Satan's world, and many injustices are done that believers in Messiah must deal with. Of course, when human laws are enacted that require a believer in Messiah to disobey God's law, then we ought to obey God rather than men. This can be referred in Acts chapter 5, verse 29. For example, as part of the civil law, God demanded that in certain circumstances the death penalty be executed. Like in Exodus chapter 21, verse 12, we read, "He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death." And in Exodus chapter 21, verse 16, we read, "He who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand, shall surely be put to death." But it is not up to believers in Messiah today to enforce these and other civil penalties. Rather, the execution of these sentences is now in the hands of civil authorities. Clearly, God has given worldly rulers the right to enforce civil law now. In that regard, they are his ministers, responsible for maintaining the civil rules formerly carried out by the government of God's nation of Israel.